20 minutes we'll get started.
Yeah.
So my name is Vijay Doradla. I work in the venture group. 2 seconds about Verizon Ventures. We're a strategically focused venture platform. Invest on behalf of Verizon in companies that we believe could have strategic long-term impact to our future. And with me today is Radhika Venkatraman, who is SVP of Networks and Technology. And I'll give you a couple of minutes to introduce yourself and talk to the audience about what kind of work you do at Verizon.
Vijay, thank you very much, and Ravi, thanks a lot for having me here. What I basically have is a horizontal technology practice inside of Verizon. And if you think of Verizon, amongst its many businesses, our biggest businesses, of course, are core networks and wireline and wireless. And between the wireline and wireless networks, we generate about $125 billion of revenue and pretty much 99% of all of our EPS. And so what my team does is supports both of our networks, which really has 4 distinct characteristics. We have a Northeast over 13 colonies-based consumer wired business. We have a national wireless business. We have a global international business that supports the big enterprises. And then we also sell our Northeast as well as our international businesses on a wholesale basis. Right? So those are the 4 big businesses. So what my team is primarily responsible for is providing what is called as the operational support systems, as well as introducing new network-based products. So we have engineers that either build or buy tools in support of delivering a service, assuring a service, proactively monitoring and maintaining our networks, laying out our infrastructure at Verizon scale, where we spend over $17 billion every year.
Right.
And then, of course, any amount of analytics using all of the data that rides our network. 70% of the internet traffic in America is on the Verizon backbone.
Wow. Right. So clearly, as you can tell, she has a very important place in Verizon and has a lot of experience, a lot of people. And you mentioned wireless, wireline, and other aspects of the network. Has anything changed since all these new technology developments are happening, where the divide between wireless and wireline is sort of like melting away, or do you think these networks are still homogeneous, standalone, vertically integrated networks?
Right, so that's actually a great question. If you think about the wireless network, what you really have is very, very dense radio networks, if you will, distributed around the US. So we have coverage for 310 million people, every inch, every nook and cranny of US is kind of covered with our Verizon wireless network. And it's a very dense, what we call as an access or an edge network, right? So when you think about the wired network, we have a very small, very deep, dense access presence only in the Northeast. And we have a metro and a very long haul, including submarine network, which supports our global enterprises as well, right? But what you really start to see is a convergence of the two. So when you think about a wireless network, you think about a small core and a very dense edge. And when you think about the wired network, you think of a relatively lean edge and a very dense core. But then with the proliferation of devices, with almost every matter of our world being driven by the networks, what we're basically seeing is that the spectrum positions that all of us have is absolutely not sufficient to densify the kind of networks that are needed for the future. So you're seeing the need for fiber going all the way to the edge. And so you're starting to see a convergence of wired and wireless, where you now have a very dense core with fiber almost all the way to the node, and then very dense edge as well. So you can almost think of it like wireless fiber or Fios wireless, however you think about it, is what's happening.
Got it. And that's a nice way of looking at it. So if we step back and think for a second the way networks are built, and we look at how networks are being built right now, what would you say are the top 3 things that have fundamentally changed the way networks are evolving. So if you were to rank order from a technology perspective, virtualization as an example, the ability to scale in and scale out, automation of the network, I'm just giving you
So I think there's two different things that are happening to our networks. One is, of course, the technology, and the other is the commercial side, right? So when you think from a commercial perspective, when you take a $17+ billion investment that we have, and you start investing, you build and they'll come. It's a very consumer-oriented network on the wireless like that. So you build and they'll come, and then you keep on densifying. And then on the wired side, where it is consumer, you can do the same thing. You build and they'll come, and so you keep building. And then for the enterprise and other B2B, you really don't do you build and they come. It's like they ask and then you build. They ask and you build. Now in doing that, it's actually highly inefficient because you're going back to the same streets and thoroughfares and so on, and digging and redigging and re-engineering on a one-off basis. So when you start thinking about how do you want to optimize, given that everybody is indeed going to use our network, you're going to have connected cities, you're going to, smart cities as people say, but it's really connected cities, smart parking meter, whatever you name it. Think about autonomous cars, think about AR, VR, and the kind of dense networks. If you believe that we need the networks to be highly intelligent, then I think it makes a lot of sense to think about how do you build for everything and then start stacking vertical businesses on top of it. So commercial is driving that. The other piece that you're seeing from a technology perspective is, we just announced 5G. So when you think about 5G, what we're really trying to now say is we're moving into the gigahertz spectrum.
Right.
And then we're basically saying, beamforming, beam dispersion have all become so advanced that we can now operate at that frequency. And when doing that, you basically have very short distances you can cover. So you basically are saying, now I'm going to be able to slice the network, I'm going to have to prioritize the traffic, I'm going to now need an order of magnitude more things in that network. So just take Boston. We have like about 1,500 macro cell towers that cover like the 7 burbs, if you will, of Boston, 800,000 people. And we think when we put 5G there, which covers anywhere from 200,000 feet, we think we're going to need like 15,000, 20,000 nodes. So all of a sudden, you're not going to be able to do an order of magnitude more things with the network. We would be hiring everybody in America and still not be done. So you're going to see an exponential growth in the intelligence built into the network and the demands on that network at very granular level, which is then going to drive nothing but automation, right? You've got to design for zero touch.
Got it. So that's a good way of starting the next question is, if you look at the capex spent by telcos in the US, Verizon and our competitors, we're talking between $17 and $20 billion. And we have 170,000 employees, so we're laying on this fiber and all that. Then you look at the web scale guys who have sort of separated the control plane and the data plane, they probably spend like a couple $2 billion a year, right, on data centers and all that kind of stuff. And so the question is, do you ever foresee us being at a point from a scale perspective and from a virtualization perspective where do you think we're going to continue to spend a lot of money building these highways out and sort of leasing it to the content guys and the commercial guys, or do you feel like we can bring efficiencies in the process like the web scale guys are doing? And maybe it's a little bit
right. So when you think about, I think you're asking whether we're going to ever virtualize or we're going to continue to buy the boxes, right?
Right. That's
I think virtualization has to happen. It's already happened in the software industry. So when we look at our functions just on the wireless side, and if you take wired as well, we're looking at some 125 or so directional network functions that we think we need in order to run the infrastructure network, right? And so today we have tens of thousands of proprietary boxes with associated software running on it. But when you start doing things an order of magnitude more, and when you start getting towards where your edge is going to start getting exceptionally smart, can you just imagine if you have 15,000 boxes, you're going to need 150,000 boxes, right? I mean, almost like an unsustainable state.
Right.
So virtualization is definitely going to happen. Whether we like it, we don't like it, I'm sure some of the equipment people in the rooms may or may not like it because it is going to be, cutting into what is today the profit margin, right? So I think that is definitely going to happen. But as we virtualize, I think you cannot just afford to take all of that software and put it in like one big cloud, if you will. I think we've got to sort of push ourselves in this industry towards a lot more standardization. So, and I think that's what you're going to see us and our partners do a lot more of. We're not just going to build a cloud, but we're also going to build clouds with standard interfaces, and you're going to start seeing a lot more intelligence at the edge. And one of our competitive advantages is really going to be us having that intelligence at the edge where low latency or any application that requires distributed edge computing is going to move the carrier.
Got it. And so if we look at the problem at a telco right now, it's a little more complex than, let's say, startups where we have a hybrid network. We have a network with technologies probably, as you mentioned, custom boxes and custom software, probably have controllers that were written 20, 30 years ago, right? So how do you, in your role at Verizon, how do you see virtualization sort of proliferating? I know there's standardization activities going on, but from a practical implementation perspective, is this a challenge for Verizon?
It is a huge challenge, but this is where I will tell you I love the startups, okay? Because the startups are really disrupting the space. If you think about, the CFOs of all the companies in the valley here that have an established business, there is no incentive to even take 1% of their profit margin down. But if I'm an insurgent, I'm a startup, then I have nothing but new business to gain working with a Verizon or an AT&T. So in our virtualization effort, we're partnering with startups from a resource orchestration perspective. For VNF services, we're almost thinking about our VNF like an app store that Apple has. Thinking of it as an industrial grade app store. How can we get anybody and everybody's VNF to work on our cloud with very standard APIs for people to leverage? And then we're not going to decide what the price is going to be. It's really the marketplace that's going to decide. So we're going to create this marketplace-based app store-like construct where the best and the lowest provider is going to win because we're going to provide the infrastructure. The economics is going to be decided in the market. Okay. The challenge for anybody who is startup is really the following, right? If you come into a company like Verizon, and we'll say something like this, we'll say like, well, I got like 100 million licenses. I need you to give me like 100 million licenses for the price of what an established company would say, okay, you need 1 plus 100 million. I'm gonna let you have all your old box licenses into the software, and I'll just charge you for one more. And now the insurgent has to absorb the price of one in the price of 100 million. But they can do it because they're building once and scaling many times. So we're actually seeing economic models where people are being disrupted and saying, whatever the price of one is by an established player, I can match it for the 100 million.
So just I wanted to drill down a little deeper into the comment you made about the app store and virtualization and all that. When we made investments in startups in the space of virtualization, 4 years ago, DNF and NFV was being talked about, but if you look at the use cases, some of the use cases that were sort of perceived ahead of others were like, virtual CPE as an example. But then you see what is happening in the market, you see SD-WAN as a use case is just completely taken off. Do you think we're in the very early stages of virtualization where one use case is being prioritized over the other use case because we're just at the beginning of this race, and then at some point, this will creep into other use cases, and then the app store type model comes in where you have an orchestration engine which is managing your network, and then you can deploy, in a very autonomous fashion, use cases such as, as virtual CPE or SD-WAN, or be it, routing, security, firewall, all that kind of stuff. Is that
Actually,
how you
really,
see it?
I think we're in the middle, right?
Okay.
We're not in early stages at all.
Right.
We have like two types of applications. One that's enterprise facing, and you have SD-WAN, virtual CPE, and so on. And the other that's on the infrastructure side, which is your E0B, your RANs, and your IMS core, and so on. I think the enterprise has taken off. Right? It was a relatively easier problem to solve compared to the infrastructure.
Right.
And so it has taken off. I think the startups have done a nice job of, insurging into the enterprises. So we're basically already in the market with hundreds of millions of dollars worth of revenue in our pipeline
Right.
for the enterprise customers with our SD-WAN
Right.
and virtual CPE product.
Right.
When you look at the infrastructure, there's really only 3 or 4 very big players, particularly on the wireless RAN side.
Right.
And one of them we don't use in the US, right? So that's really only leaves you with like 3 players, if you will. So then the question is, how can somebody come and insert that market, right? Because it's pretty tough. There's only 3 players, the technology isn't that easy. There isn't like hundreds of thousands of companies you go sell it to. There's only a limited number of big scale carriers, right? So what you're going to see this year is enough maturation that you're going to see tilt on both sides. Inside of Verizon, we think we're going to do 75 virtual network functions this year, or more. We're pushing ourselves to do at least 75. So I talked about 125. I think we're going to do a big chunk of it this year. How much traffic we carry, we have to see.
Right.
But the infrastructure is getting ready.
Right. And we probably see this in terms of business models like firm networks. They came in with M2M and IoT traffic and said, hey, we'll come and virtualize your EDC, right? Which is traffic that is not your core traffic, it's new traffic, you don't know how to deal with it, but then all of a sudden, that sort of, as you mentioned, creeps into the core of the network with real live traffic. I think we have a couple of minutes, and I was told that I should go to the audience, open up for questions. So, any questions for Radhika? There's one down there.
Verizon's been very active with acquiring content, and I'm just curious how that affects your role and how you're thinking about your business.
So when we think of our business, we really think in terms of 3 major components. One is what we call as the core business, which is really a network-based business. And then on top of it, we have what we call as a platform business. And then on top of it, we have what we call as a solutions business. So when you think of platform, it's not like the core has no platforms. If you think of a Fios business, the Fios is a platform. When you think of our virtual networks, the virtual networks is a platform. 5G is a platform. And AOL is a platform. So when we think of our media and the new businesses, it's really an adjacency to our core. We're not moving away from the core. We're just sort of augmenting and leveraging the core to do more beyond the core.
Any other questions? While the audience is thinking, I'd go back to a question around AI and ML and all the stuff that's happening in the market. You have a big network, you have a lot of data that's coming in, you have analytics that you're looking for in terms of insights. Can you talk a little bit about sort of a problem that you're trying to solve in terms of leveraging this next generation technologies to solve it?
Right. So there's really 3 areas, Vijay, that we're looking at.
Yeah.
While I know that all the new product teams are always thinking about deep learning, machine learning for new products, from my perspective, like unless you bring some of those into the core, you never do Verizon scale, right? So we're doing it in 3 areas. One is when you think about service delivery. Everything we deliver as a service today has a workflow and a workforce associated with it. And that workflow has states that go from a few hours, a few minutes to a few hours to, it could even be multiple days. And they are generally designed for 95% what we call quote-unquote flow-through. So much of the manual labor in the company is actually working on what we call as fallout. So now we're basically saying, hey, we actually know every step that a user has to take to work the fallout. How can we systematically have machines learn that 5% work? And we actually store 7 years of data. So we're basically saying, how can we learn that and start taking that down to maybe like a 0.5% or less, right? So that's one use case. Another is really around proactively monitoring our networks. We used to pride in building like a NASA-like interface to, network operation centers, if you will, to monitor every aspect of the network. Well, we don't, we do a good job of filtering alarms, correlating alarms, and then a subset of it becomes a ticket that someone has to go do the work on. But what we don't do a very good job is figuring out for the piece of work that humans decide, what are the steps that they take. Today we just assume those are like some high IQ people. But then when you're moving into a high IQ network, it's not going to be possible for a small number of people to do that. So we have to change our fundamental processes to be able to capture every interaction leading to a cause and effect. And then we can learn that and then reduce our NOx to be not NASA, but non-existent, right? And then the third is when we do virtual, we're basically saying it's got to be built with zero touch in it. That means machine learning becomes part of your closed loop service assurance. And without that, we would be just hiring everyone.
I think we're out of time. Thank you very much, Radhika, for your time. And
Thank you.